Good morning, everyone. My name is Chris Urban. I'm the Director of Civic Engagement and Projects at the Greater Cleveland Partnership. Thank you for joining us today for our panel discussion, The Civic Sector Role in an Inclusive Economy. Fostering equitable and inclusive economic growth throughout Greater Cleveland is a foundational component of the work of numerous public and civic sector organizations. Today, we'll hear from 3 such agencies about the ways that each of them are actively integrating equity and inclusion into their missions, the recent successes and challenges they have encountered, and what opportunities lie ahead as our region prepares to emerge from this global pandemic. Before I turn it over to our moderator, Brian Hall, just one quick housekeeping item. Toward the end of today's discussion, we'll have an opportunity for our panelists to answer a few questions that come in from the audience. At any time during the discussion, please feel free to submit questions you have in the questions panel, and we will try to get as many as we can in the time that we have. With that, I will turn it over to Brian to introduce himself and our panel before we dive into the discussion. Brian?
Good morning, Chris. Thank you, and good morning, everyone. It's a delight to be able to moderate this panel today with 3 friends and colleagues who I've worked quite a bit with over the last decade or so. And so we're going to jump right into it. I will say you mentioned the challenges of the pandemic. One of them is that we have to meet by Zoom or WebEx or Teams or whatever it might be. And each of us had some individual struggle this morning to get on this meeting, but we made it. Dr. Melissa Burrows is with us, but could not get her camera functioning, but we'll have a great conversation just the same. So thank you all panelists for joining. I'd like to introduce each of you. First of all, on the phone is Dr. Melissa Burrows, the Director of the Mayor's Office of Equal Opportunity at the City of Cleveland. On my right, I don't know how that works out when the camera flips it around and back around to the audience, but on my right is Natoya Walker-Minor, the Deputy General Manager, Administration and External Affairs for Greater Cleveland Regional Transit Authority. And on my left, Constance T. Haack, Chief Administrative Officer, Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District, and member of one of the best, no, Constance, the best Leadership Cleveland class ever. Classmate. So I'm going to jump right in because I know you guys have a lot to talk about, and happy to help moderate this conversation. We look forward to discussion. I hope the audience will feel free to ask questions. We're going to start with a little bit of looking back. All of your organizations have made equity, diversity, and inclusion a really important part of your work. Natoya, both your previous organization and the one you're at today, Constance, your organization, and Dr. Burrows, you've been leaders in our community on the issues. So I wanted to give you a chance to talk about some of the work that you're most proud of, that your organizations have done on the DEI space. So I'll start with Dr. Burrows.
Good morning. Thank you, Brian, and it's nice to see Constance and Natoya, and I apologize that my camera isn't working, but I'm glad to be here. So happy Thursday, happy rainy Thursday. And before we started the conversation, we were talking about the challenges today, but I said that at least it's not snowing. So I'm thankful for that.
Good point.
So I would, right. So for the city of Cleveland, let me start out just by setting the tone relative to the mayor's sort of his action items. But more importantly, the mayor has always had a lens toward diversity, equity, and inclusion. And for the mayor, that is his philosophy around self-help. And his self-help philosophy really talks about how a person or an individual, and most importantly, a resident within the city of Cleveland, providing opportunities so that that individual can have opportunities within the city. And when I say that, from a city perspective, that means that we need to create sort of onboarding on-ramps so that others can take advantage of opportunities. One such program, and as I sit with Natoya, and it's hard for me to say Natoya without saying Chief Natoya Walker-Minor, but One of those programs Natoya and I worked on 2 years ago with Living Cities, and that is our small contract rotation program. And that is a program in which very small contractors, and for the city of Cleveland, that particular designation means that it's a contractor who makes less than $3 million over a 3-year period. They are provided opportunities to sort of join the ecosystem within the city. And that means that last year we held a series of classes, 8 classes in fact, to assist our small contractors with opportunities around things that we know small contractors need. So assistance with estimating, assistance with budgeting, assistance with how do you market to government agencies. The very last class we held was trying to sort of retool yourself. When you realize that maybe the business or the company that you're involved in, maybe you need to just sort of retool and think of another opportunity that would work for you. And so thinking through those kind of potentially challenges, but creating on-ramps so that the businesses can thrive and survive within the city. And then finally, I'll just say that we know that the pandemic has greatly impacted our small contractors. And so for us, we're trying to take a hands-on approach, specifically around some of the money that the city will receive from the government, to figure out how we can help businesses, especially during this trying to regroup after the pandemic. So I would say our focus is really around inclusion, equity, and trying to eliminate disparities that we know currently exist for small businesses and for people of color.
Mm-hmm. Muted, Brian. Mute.
Thanks, Constance. Yeah, thanks, Dr. Burrows. I couldn't let you finish without just mentioning the work that we all did together, working on community benefits as a policy, another on-ramp in our region that the city led the effort to bring together such a diverse group of folks. So I'm going to go to you next, Natoya. Tell us some of the things you're most proud of your organization's efforts over the last few years.
Sure. So I thank you for the invitation to be here. I've been here at RTA now for just shy of 2 months. And one thing that I walked into that I'm working to scale is our internal DEI, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, which is really focused internally on what we're doing, but also with an external lens. We, unlike so many other organizations, when we look at our employee universe, our employee universe is diverse. In fact, it may be more people of color than non-people of color employed in our 2,100 person universe. But the question becomes, are they in leadership positions? And while we do have some in leadership positions, those are the things that we have to continue to work on. So I am beginning to think about how do we, inside of our organization, culturally deal with an African-American woman who's leading this organization now. The chief operating officer is African-American. And how do we ensure that everyone feels empowered and seen in our organization? And so that's one of the things that I'm beginning to think about. From a broader lens, working with each of you all, it's been a phenomenal 15-year run in terms of working with the city, the sewer district, GCP, and so many other organizations, Dominion, and all of those partners that signed on to the community benefit agreements. And that really was an on-ramp for our community, because that allowed our community to really begin to think about diversity from 2 lenses. From the contracting side of things, which is where the discussion began, but we really began then to migrate to the employee universe and the leadership components that had been for the last 18 years a part of the commission. And so really building that agenda and really beginning to talk about an inclusive economy from a procurement process. Those are things that I'm really proud of, that I bring here to this organization, that I look forward to working inside this organization and with each of you all. Lastly, I just want to highlight Dr. Burrows, what she was able to do with that small contract rotation program. The Office of Equal Opportunity had not received a grant in 10 years. And when I hired her 6 years ago, I said, you know, we need some grants. And she looked and looked and looked, and she found one, and she scaled that. She scaled that with those classes that you mentioned. And then with Constance, her capability, Brian, early on when we were dealing with community benefit agreements, to really establish a partnership with Dominion, her private sector peer, and to really roll that out from a community-based perspective. Those are things that I'm proud that I had a hand in, and I just acknowledge each of you for your leadership.
Thank you, Latoya, and we know you're going to do great things at the Regional Transit Authority, and I imagine you're already shaking things up over there, so I'm not surprised. Constance, all of your organizations have demonstrated best-in-class efforts. In fact, you have some plaques to demonstrate that in your trophy case somewhere at the sewer district. But what are you most proud of the work that you've done?
Well, thank you, Brian, for having me, and especially for having me on this esteemed panel. It's great to be here. When I think about diversity, equity, and inclusion for the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District, I really think of it in 4 buckets. One is service. The other is spending, workforce, and affordability. So just to talk about each one of them briefly for a moment, the level of service and the quality of service that we provide to our customers is really the first diversity, equity, and inclusion feature that we offer. We convey wastewater, treat wastewater, we manage stormwater, and we want to do it for all of our customers at the highest level possible. And so we set high standards for ourselves, and we try to meet them. The other is access to our service. It's very important for us that all of our customers and everyone in Northeast Ohio has access to clean, safe, and affordable water services. So that is a second aspect of service that is very important, and it really is about diversity, equity, and including everyone. The second is spending and making sure that MBEs, WBEs, and small businesses have an opportunity to participate in our large construction program, as well as our goods and services day-to-day spending. So we have a business opportunity program which sets goals, construction project by construction project, to ensure that our community as a whole receives the benefit of the dollars that we're spending. And those dollars, of course, are all coming from our ratepayers. In terms of workforce, it's very important for us that our workforce reflects the community that we serve. It's very important that we are hiring a cross-section and a diverse, in the broadest sense of the term, workforce, that we're training, promoting, providing opportunity, and that we're continuing to educate ourselves about something we think is very important, and that is cultural competence. So providing those opportunities to our employees is very important, and outreaching into the community is very important. And you might be surprised to learn that not every junior high or high school student knows what it means to come and work in a wastewater organization. It may not be the first thing they think about when they're at school. So we've invested some time in working with youth programs like ACE and the STEP program, and others that expose students to the opportunities in the water industry and in wastewater in particular. We've worked with the Urban League's Work Now program to help individuals understand not only what above ground construction is like, but also what underground construction is like and what opportunities there are. So those are just some of the examples of our workforce efforts over time. And finally, affordability. In order to make sure that everyone has access to clean, safe, and affordable water, we have to have rates that are affordable for everyone. So we balance, as everyone else, the needs we have to provide our services and the cost, which is fairly costly, with the reality of our community, and that there are those who are unable to afford our services, and we are looking at ways always in which we can provide opportunities for cost savings for all customers. So service spending, workforce affordability, that kind of is the landscape of our DEI effort.
Constance, thank you. Talking about challenges, my power went out just as we were, you were beginning your remarks, so I managed to get back in by phone. So hopefully everybody else is still online. So those were great looks back at the things we've done, and you've already alluded to some of what I was going to ask. I wanted just each of you to talk about the opportunities that you've had to work together as organizations and things where you've supported the efforts of the other organizations. And we'll go in reverse order this time. I'll start with you, Constance.
Oh, okay, thank you. You know, for us to work with external partners of not only other utilities, but organizations throughout our community is really critical. One of the most recent activities that we've been engaged in is called the Greater Cleveland Water Equity Partners. This is a group of individuals which include the two large water utilities in our region, CWD, the Cleveland Water Department, and us. And we're in a relationship with Burton Bell Carr, Slavic Village, the Cleveland Water Alliance, Drink Local, Drink Tap, and the Alliance for the Great Lakes, among others. And we're working together on issues of equity around water in Northeast Ohio. It's a new partnership, but we're making progress on affordability, on workforce, on climate issues. And we've developed a program called the Water Champions, which is going to be outreaching to individuals in the community to get them signed up for affordability programs. We spent many years working with the construction diversity and inclusion effort at GCP. It's been an extremely rewarding and challenging activity in an effort to really include minorities and females in the construction industry. It's involved a number of partners, from labor to large corporations, from the healthcare sector and others. And I think I already mentioned that we work with a number of schools and programs related to students, and also the Greater Cleveland Urban League. We are involved with a program with them. And finally, I'll just mention that we have a scholarship at Central State University. It's the Congressman Louis Stokes Scholar, and we provide opportunities for individuals in the water management program at Central State. We provide them with internships and scholarships and an opportunity to work at our facility.
Great. That's a lot of partnerships. Natoya, I'm sure similarly at the Transit Authority, but also in your work at the city, there's been many partnerships. What are some of the ones that you'd like to highlight?
Sure. So one of the partnerships I'd like to highlight now is RTA is just coming out of a strategic plan where we, for the first time since 1975, when RTA was created, have just gone through a comprehensive system redesign. And our comprehensive system redesign will roll out publicly on June 13th. And the system redesign is focused on three things, all related to an inclusive economy: workforce, healthcare, and education for students. And that is because our position is that public transit is economic development. And because public transit is economic development, all of your organizations are critical to the work that we do, because we are leaning into workforce, because we know that in order for the economy of this community to improve, people have to have access to work. So we reduced our all-day pass by 50 cents. We reduced the number of transfers people have to take to work. You all may recall when all of us were doing our work around Opportunity Quarter, and we learned that in the most egregious case, 2.5 hours, 4 transfers for someone to get to work out in Solon. What we know is that the 3 fastest growing economic hubs for workforce for a livable wage are Solon, Strongsville, and the Aerozone. So we are experimenting with what are other mobility solutions that we can have. So we're experimenting with that in terms of a first mile, last mile. For example, Swage Lock. There is a bus that goes there. Does it need to work? Does it need to be shift specific? So as we think about those types of things and where other employers are and the work that we're doing collectively in this community to really get to mobility solutions that are tied directly to economic development. So those things are critical as I think about the role of where are the locations for the sewer district. It's not just the downtown office. So what is the distance from the closest bus stop to the other locations? As we partner with GCP actually conducted a part of the economic study 2 years ago. And so we really took that study into consideration when we did the system redesign. So we looked at the routes that were the lowest frequency and looked at the connectivity so that we could connect the connectivity, because we want to make sure that when employers decide to come to Cleveland, part of the work that's happening over at the city and the county when they recruit employers, that we're on the front end of those development conversations. So I'm really excited that even though I've only been here for 2 months, one of the things that I've been able to do is get a meeting with Sherwin-Williams so that we can be on the front end of that work. They're not only building and revitalizing and making a transformational investment in Public Square, but they're also going out. And so, what are the needs for transit? And so those are the types of things that I'm really excited about, that I bring here with a passion around workforce development and really viewing public transit through the lens of economic development to tie into the ambassadors, for example, that are working through the sewer district. So what are their needs and what are the transit access points and what are we learning? What are we hearing? And to be able to have the relationships that we have and that we've developed over the years so that I can infuse that into our system redesign folks when we're thinking about bus stops and the number of shelters and those types of things. Also, as it relates to the city of Cleveland, and while RTA does not have MBE and FBE, because we're under the DBE, we can work with the city of Cleveland through B2G Now and LCP Tracker, because those systems talk to one another, and OEO can then advance information for contractors that are eligible and ready to become DBE. So I'm excited about those types of things, because it's really, when I said earlier that our collective work 10 years ago on community benefit agreements was just the floor, it really was, because it allowed us to think creatively about what the possibilities for the inclusive economy are. And so I'm just excited to work and to continue to work with all of you from this lens, viewing public transit as economic development.
Thanks, Natoya. Great summary. There's so much richness there. And this is Civic Connection, so demonstrating that connection. Dr. Burrows, what would you add in terms of collaborations?
Sure. Excuse me. Thank you, Brian. And let me just say, especially Brian, as you highlighted with GCP and the city and the MOU for community benefits, at the time, I think it was 2013. And at that time,
yes.
If you think about it, those were really bold steps as a community, really to have this collective strategy and include both public and private sector partners on this signatory for the agreement. So I appreciate that piece and that reminder. And I also wanted to extend that a little bit further in terms of some of the work that we're doing now. And the first one is really around, as Natoya mentioned, Opportunity Corridor. The City of Cleveland have 3 internal committees, and even though I'm saying they're internal, it only means that they're headed by 3 different directors. But the one that I particularly am leading is the Neighborhood Economic Impact and Equity Committee. And that particular committee, we're really focused on how can we create opportunities around being employed, and specifically people and residents that live within the city of Cleveland. How can they be employed within Opportunity Corridor? And even before they can be employed, which businesses are going to locate within Opportunity Corridor, so that, well, one, we can identify a workforce that's ready, willing, and able to participate. And then secondly, if the workforce needs some type of assistance to get ready and to become ready, then we know that there are some unique opportunities for us to at least create, again, these on-ramps so that people can be employed. And really around the work that's being done by Dr. Bob Gleason at Cleveland State University. And so Dr. Gleason is able to take this big data and narrow that data and distill it down to the neighborhood, and most importantly, a block by block level. And so what that says to us, and what the information tells us, as Natoya mentioned, people who live in the city may be going out to Solon or Stowe. They may be going out further. And so the connection is, by all 3 of us who are speaking today, it's connecting the dots so that we can ensure that the workforce is able to meet the demands that are created within the city. And so Dr. Gleason is building this tool and has a tool that's available that will allow us all to sort of leverage opportunities that occur within the actual workforce. And then lastly, I'd just like to say that, from a City of Cleveland perspective, one of the things that was identified, I think now 2 years, it's funny because of last year, we all kind of lost a year. So I believe it was 2 years ago, there was the whole notion around eliminating health disparities and how racism is a public health issue. And so that involved connecting a lot of different people, and not just businesses, but leaders within the industry, so that we could all connect and speak the same language around how we can eliminate mostly health disparities, but we know that that's not just the only disparity that exists. And so it's time for us to sort of widen that net through all of our partnerships, and that's what we do.
Excellent, excellent. So, I want to leave time for some questions, but we still have, I think, another place I'd like to cover. When you think about the work that we've all done, and we've been talking about our 10-year relationship in this work, I know for me, I wake up some days and I think about equity, inclusion, and where we are as a region, frankly, where we are as a country, but particularly where we are as a region, and all the good work we're doing, and the gaps are still just so wide. And, I want to re-examine what we're attempting to do. And I know we've made great progress. Dr. Burrows, as you talk about 2013, the conversation around community benefits was so controversial. The fact that we were trying to change the culture and the thinking around major projects was really transformative at that time. And I, from a cultural standpoint, we've accomplished it. But when we look at the impact of the results, the wealth gap, the wage gap, the businesses that still struggle, I know we all are challenged. So I'm going to ask you, what are your thoughts looking back over that? Where have we missed the mark, and what might we want to do differently? And Natoya, I'll start with you this time. Do we have Natoya? Is she on mute?
We are, I'm sorry. I think we have to recognize, as taxing as it is, that we're always in a posture of teaching and bringing people along and not justifying, but making it make sense why we have to do the things that we do and using fact to do it. And it's exhausting because our emotional intelligence has to consistently be high because we can't act with emotion. We have to have the emotional intelligence to have the conversation, to do the digging so that we have the facts around why what we're suggesting matters. When I reflect back on what we were doing, the boldness of what we were doing 10 years ago, it was just the stick-to-itiveness of all that were involved. Yes, it was draining, but it was important. It mattered. And I think that we have to continuously stand on the shoulders of those that came before us in a way that we are articulating the critical importance and the economic impact of it, that all of this ties to the economics. So when we start talking about racism as a public health challenge, it's really talking about those social determinants of health. And some people would say, well, what are social determinants of health and how does that relate to economics? But it relates to economics when it starts talking about education, workforce, housing, access, public transportation, and who has access and who doesn't. And why, when we are thinking, we always have to think about how do we incorporate diversity, equity, and inclusion into the conversation, into the decision making. And some could say, and some do say, well, why are you always injecting race? And so my answer is I'm not injecting race, I'm injecting equity of opportunity. Because even when we look at our organizations, and we may have some people of color in leadership, but then when you have the majority on the frontline staff, the question becomes why? Or you don't have any in the STEM areas, why? And so you have to begin to think about how we educate and inform those in our community, and really going to the data points of how do you guide that forward? How do you make this make sense where you are building alliances? This is not to be divisive at all. This is about building unity as we move forward for the economy, the inclusive economy of this community and in fact the country. And that's why it is so unfortunate that last May happened, but it did happen. And what happened as a result of that is that people really began to talk more boldly about it in organizations across the country. And while we have been talking about it for 10 years, and our friends at some of our friends with those businesses that have been talking about it for years, it was elevated to a scale where we're talking about it, but still that offends some people. And actually, Brian, after our test call, I called Constance just because of some things that we're experiencing here that she made a reference to, that she has some experience with, and how we guide ourselves around things like that. And I think the capability to pick up the phone and call somebody who has experience that you don't have, that you could feel the safety net and really the social capital to gain that insight on how to navigate these things so that we are acting from an emotionally intelligent way is critical too. So I think that the relationships matter, and it helps us in this community because we all care and love this community.
Thanks, Natoya. Dr. Burrows, what would you say when you look back at all the great things that your organizations have done individually and collectively? What's missing still? Where do you see the work that we need to continue?
I think the biggest challenge still deals with having honest conversations among people who look differently than us. And I say that meaning, so race equity, diversity, inclusion, social justice. Those are conversations, obviously, that need to occur. Well, you know what? Let me not use the word obviously, because it's not obvious for everyone, right? But those are the conversations that we need to have, so that the paradigm can shift and look differently. Let me use a personal example with this to just hone in on why it's important. Realizing that, as Natoya said, last May occurred, which is still hard to believe that it occurred. So I actually have a friend, and she's become a friend. So during the pandemic, we decided that we wanted to start walking once a week. She is a Caucasian female woman, and so we walk every week. Our sons are also friends. But why I'm bringing that up to you is that I can ask her questions now that we are friends, right? We have had a tenure now together, and she can ask me questions as well. We need to get to that level of those sort of uncomfortable, squeamish kind of, I don't really know if I should ask, but I really should ask kind of conversations. And we need to have them in our personal lives and also in our professional lives. And what happens is we will sometimes have them and are more likely to have them in our personal lives. But then when we're in our professional worlds, that's when we start to say, I'm not sure how to really create that sort of ability to have sort of these, there's a whole program around crucial conversations, honest conversations, authentic conversations. And until we can get to the point where we can ask those difficult questions, the narrative will not change. And so we need to have those conversations in the workforce. But one thing that we have to make sure that we do is create safe environments in which the conversations can occur. And not only are they to be safe, but they really should be at the point where, the whole Vegas thing, whatever happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. We don't want people to have conversations. If I'm pouring out my soul and trying to really hone in and figure out diversity, equity, inclusion, and I'm asking you these difficult conversations, I don't want to walk out the conference room and 2 seconds later have someone, confront me and say, you didn't know what diversity meant? No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, look, I want to understand it more. I want to understand it from the lens of Eurocentrism versus Afrocentrism. How do we they're different, but how do we collectively thrive in the same environment and get to the point where it's not based on our race or the color of our skin. It's based on overall equity, inclusion, and social justice. And so having those honest conversations is a crucial thing that we all have to have in the workplace, and of course, and in our professional worlds as well.
Yeah.
Wow. Fantastic. Constance, what
Wow.
have we missed?
I don't even know how to follow it. It's so much I'm just thinking about. I'll just start with what Dr. Burrows said. Those conversations are just so important, and it requires people of different races to both be willing to step up. We as African Americans are often not willing to talk about things because we don't want to be offended. And sometimes people who are not people of color don't want to talk about it because they don't want to offend. So here we had several racial justice sessions with our employees. We did one just with us, a Zoom call on June 19th, on Juneteenth last year. And we had a panel of people, a cross-section of folks from the sewer district, talk about their reaction to the murder of George Floyd and what it meant to them, and the reaction that others have had. And I thought it was going to be the only conversation we had. We have 750 odd employees here at the sewer district, and we had almost 200 people on that call. So it was a very well attended Zoom meeting, and everybody wanted to continue the conversation. So we did a second one on the issues of systemic racism and white privilege. And in that case, we invited in a consultant to kind of lead the conversation. And then we decided to do these individual conversations, to Dr. Burrow's point, where people could talk to someone of a different race. We asked them to talk 3 times for an hour each. And we called it, I Know I'm Going to Say Something Stupid. So we just started off with that. You know, I know I'm going to say something stupid, so we can just get that out of the way and then have these conversations. So we had about 25 people who agreed to have these conversations. They were confidential, so we don't know specifically what was said, but those were conversations that tended to be impactful for the people that were participating. And then we did our last racial justice dialogue on the issue of policing. And we invited a panel in to talk about that. These have all been extremely well attended. And these conversations matter. People say, well, what does it matter that so-and-so, is talking? We have got to continue to educate ourselves, both African Americans and other people of color and non-African Americans. It is all of our responsibility to continue the education process around the issues of race. We were not taught properly in school. And so there's a lot of information out there, and it's all of our responsibility to learn and to share with one another. But in terms of where we missed the mark, when I look back, Chris, I go back a little bit further. So sometimes I feel like I'm having a really bad day. And then I think, well, what was a bad day like for Harriet Tubman? I think about the fact that this is not a sprint. This is a marathon. This is these issues are issues that require constant attention and diligence and moving the needle forward. And I feel as though I'm here to do my part until it passes on to the next. And so I try not to spend too much time being discouraged, and also to realize that we have made progress. And that progress is being felt by real people in real ways, and I'm really proud of that. But as a community, I would like to say that I feel that we've got to grapple with the issues of poverty in all of its forms. And this community in Northeast Ohio will never move forward until we truly look at those issues, the issues of poverty.
Great. That this is just fantastic conversation and excellent points from the 3 of you who have hands-on experience in the work. I love the stories I heard. Constance, I can agree with the conversations, Dr. Burrow, with the conversations. We had them in our organization, and our culture has changed. It's hard to measure culture, but you know it when you feel it. You know the things that you talk about that you didn't talk about before. You know the interest that people have in things that they didn't have before. And ours started with the REI training when we first, all of our leadership and then all of our staff went through the racial awareness program, and it started making us ask questions of ourselves and our work. It led to a discussion group that began before George Floyd. Actually, I think we were a year before the George Floyd killing. We had started having these monthly discussion groups on books, on articles, on topics. Anybody can show up that wants to. And in the course of a year, about 90% of our staff had participated, and about 50% participated on a regular basis. We'd come for lunch and we'd have small group discussion. And I have felt it in the work I do. So I really just want to echo your comments about how important it is that on a personal level and on a business level that we open ourselves to conversations to say something stupid, right? But it's the only way that we'll move forward as a society. So I want to just check with you, Chris, to see if there's any questions. Since I'm on the phone, I can't see the chat. Anything that you'd like to raise, or anyone in our audience that would like to raise?
Brian, we have nothing really in the chat at this point from questions. So I think it's a testament to the conversation we've been having with our panelists and the completeness and the in-depth look at perspectives of things. You know, the only question I would have, Brian, is you know, related to the pandemic. What opportunities might exist for the public agency to come out? I know we kind of touched on that early on, but you know, if each panelist could probably speak to, you know, this very unique opportunity potentially through the challenges that the pandemic has created. You know, what opportunities might there be to kind of reset and look at further inclusion and equity conversations and changes to the way things are done in our region?
Thanks, Chris, because that is where I was going to try to bring this around to also. So I'll just add a little bit to that. I want to add to what Chris just asked in terms of what are the opportunities. What are the opportunities for the business community in partnership with you? You each mentioned various ways that we've partnered in the past. Looking forward at the new challenges that you see, give us some ideas on how we continue to convene and continue to work together. And I guess particularly in light of what's going to be a significant opportunity to invest in our region, that all of us would heavily advocate that investment go towards equitable outcomes. So how about you, Dr. Burrows? We'll start with you. What's the opportunities and how do we partner with the business community and the public sector?
Sure. Excuse me. Sure. So really around small business development, our Department of Economic Development, they've had several grant opportunities for businesses to participate and to receive funding to assist their businesses. Now, I will tell you the internal discussion that's occurring right now is how do we reach those contractors who may not A, know about the grant opportunities, and B, they may be a small business to the extent that they are unable to complete the paperwork. And so the more intimate conversation is how do we hold hands of those individuals who may need assistance with completing the paperwork, because, you know, again, as a small business, you may not have the luxury or ability to stop long enough to
I think we're having some your audio, Dr. Burrows.
You're in the mode of, excuse me, constantly trying to get the work hands of those individuals so that we can widen the net so that others can also receive funding and capital. Sorry, can you hear me now?
All right.
Okay, I think, can you hear me now?
Yeah, your last sentence came through. We could hear you the whole time, but it was coming through, at least for me, it was coming very, very, very slow. But I can hear you.
Oh.
So, Natoya, what do you think the opportunities are and how does the private sector play into it?
Sure. So am I on? Yeah. So yeah. I think that we are at a pivotal time in the history of our country. The plans that President Biden has talked about, the plan he talked about last night with American families, the proposal he wrote out a couple of weeks ago, the American jobs plans, those plans are so incredibly bold. I mean, they're larger than FDR's Great Society. You know, they're larger than the New Deal, you know, that came out of those administrations, those other administrations that were very progressive when it came to the health and economics of our community. And as those federal dollars roll into our community, we have to be wise stewards in how those funds are utilized. So I know that in this community, typically, you know, with city councils and county councils, those dollars are segregated by the leaders in those communities. This is not that, because we don't have equitability across our landscape. And so I think that we have to be bold enough to ask the questions of our leaders, to use those dollars to get to a level of equality. The near west side and the east side do not, there's a stark disparity between some of our communities. We need to have all boats rising in this community, and that should be our request in this community, coming out of our Chamber of Commerce, having those conversations with our elected leaders, how we invest those dollars to make sure that there's equitable opportunity for travel access points, equitable opportunity in housing, equitable opportunity in local business development, so that we have 17 thriving communities. If I'm talking citywide, if I'm talking countywide, we have a county that's thriving and not 4 or 5 pockets that are thriving. And that means that we have to be wise stewards as these dollars, millions, are coming into this community. And I can hear former Councilwoman Fannie Lewis say, with all the money that's on past projects, with all the money that has come through here, our streets could be paved with gold. And I'm not saying that our streets could be paved with gold. And I think that that was just a way for her to say, we have to be smart. We have to be wise, because we have wicked intersectional problems. And as we unbuckle those problems, we have to think, how do we get to an equitable economy? And we have to demand that of our leaders. We have to demand that of ourselves, that we have the boldness, since we are occupying some seats of influence and decision making, to be wise stewards of those dollars, to make sure that this entire community are beneficiaries of the resources that come to this community. And what I'm really excited about is our own former Congresswoman, now Secretary of HUD, is occupying a seat. We have 2 other mayors in great seats, former mayors, Department of Transportation, Department of Labor. And as those dollars come into our community for the work that we've been able to do in this community around community benefits, housing, and economics, we've got to demand, and we've got to give voice to the voiceless, to make sure that those dollars are used wisely, and that this community is better in perpetuity after we're gone.
Excellent. Natoya, great points, and I'm glad you focused on the federal opportunities that are going to translate here locally, and the need to capture them. Your comments about former Councilman Fannie Lewis, that's exactly what she would be saying too. So thank you for that. All right, we've got another about 4 minutes. So Constance, you can bring us home.
All right. Well, thank you. I just echo everything that Dr. Burrows, and definitely what you just said, Natoya. You're so right. I think what I've learned, and I think we've all learned, not just here, but around the world from this pandemic, is that we really are all in this together. The pandemic, this virus doesn't care about race and geography, and it has touched all of us. And so we have to begin to focus as one community, and to allocate dollars where the needs really are. And I think that's really what Natoya was saying, to put those dollars where the needs really are. But it starts with us in our individual organizations, both in the private sector, in the public sector, and in private businesses, small businesses as well as large, looking at the barriers that they have within their own organizations and eliminating barriers to success for employment and for full participation and for access. Where are our barriers here in the sewer district that we can work on that are going to provide greater diversity, equity, and inclusion? So it really starts with each organization, and not feeling as though it's someone else's job. So I think that making it personal is really important. I think focusing on the elimination of barriers, and I think the transportation barriers that are being eliminated with RTA are so important for people who are trying to pull themselves out of poverty and to move into viable family sustaining employment. They have to get to the job. They have to get to the job. I mean, it's a simple concept. So the elimination of barriers, I think, is really important. It's something we all need to look at. And I think that will help us in terms of really maximizing this opportunity in history. Did we lose you, Brian?
Well, I'm sorry, I'm still here. I had hit mute. But I just said thank you to my friends and colleagues. We're going to continue the work. We won't get tired. We'll keep our hands on the plow. Interestingly, to your comments, at the 50 Club last month, the CEO of Eaton, Craig Arnold, was asked to speak. And the 50 Club is the business leaders and organizational leaders in our community that come together once a month for a speaker. And oftentimes the speaker talks about their company and how they grew it and what's coming up, et cetera, or maybe something in the economy. And Craig took the opportunity, Constance, to talk about Eaton for about 3 minutes. And he spent the next 22 minutes talking about Cleveland. And he said to this audience, we should all take it personally. So I like your comment there. His comment was that we lead the nation in too many categories that are in the wrong direction, poverty being the number one, and we should all take it personally. And it was, to me, and I told him this, I was just so proud that he took the time to do that. I don't know how long the 50 Club's been in existence. I know I've been involved for over 10 years, and I've never heard anyone challenge this community in a 50 Club speech rather than talk about their companies. And so that's the kind of leadership that we hope will drive us forward.
Nice.
So with that, Chris, I'll turn it back
Brian,
over to you.
Sorry, Brian, was that recorded? Were we able to get a copy of that, or is that just internal to the members of the 50 Club?
Yeah, it is not recorded. In fact, it's not recorded in no media, but I wouldn't, well, I won't say, Craig has been speaking out more vocally about Cleveland. As you know, he's really been focused on the digital divide and has pledged Eaton support to close that gap. But I thought that message to business leaders was so important and so vital and so courageous of him to take the stand and do that at the place that he did it.
So as a recommendation, I don't even know if it's within your wheelhouse to do, but it would be great if he could have that speech and expand it for a city club, one of their lunchtime meetings that they typically have, because the last time somebody spoke about Cleveland, it was about 3 years ago, and it was Cleveland dead last. And so if he is speaking out at that level to talk about what we're doing, especially at a time when resources are coming into our community, and especially somebody who's leading a global company like he is, that would be phenomenal. So I don't know if it's in your wheelhouse, but I think that more people need to hear.
You can
that
always
coming.
ask, Natoya, right? Never hurts to ask. All right, we're 2 minutes after 10. Chris, any closing comments?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you, Brian, and thank our panelists for sharing your time with us this morning and this incredibly insightful and important discussion. And thank everybody for attending, who attended this morning. Through the Greater Cleveland Civic Connection Program, GCP continues to work with our key public sector partners to advance economic growth in our region. We're actively developing more opportunities like this webinar for our business community to learn about the work of these public agencies. So we hope to have you all with us again soon. Thank you again. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
everybody.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.